At 18, rain poured over me as my father's voice sliced through the night. "Pack your things and get out. You're no daughter of mine." That moment shattered every illusion of family I had ever believed in. Alone, carrying a life inside me, I thought I was finished. But years of silence hid secrets far darker than my teenage mistake. What if the people who claimed to love me were the ones who destroyed me? I returned, not for revenge, but for truth. And the truth I carried would turn their perfect world into ashes. The Matthews family was the kind of household neighbors whispered about with admiration. Our house, with its pristine white shutters and perfectly trimmed hedges, sat like a crown jewel in the heart of town. My father, Richard Matthews, was a respected lawyer whose presence commanded both fear and reverence. My mother, Margaret, presided over the Women's League, orchestrating charity events that painted her as the epitome of grace. And then there was my brother, Daniel, straight-A student, star athlete, and the so-called pride of the Matthews name. And then there was me, Claire, 18, quiet, careful, always told I was sweet but forgettable. I had grown up in the shadow of my family's perfection, the unspoken message being that I was only valuable if I didn't disrupt the image they had built brick by brick. But on the night of Daniel's scholarship celebration, my secret pressed against my ribs with every heartbeat. I was carrying life inside me, a secret that could fracture the porcelain mask my parents wore so well. The dining room glowed with candlelight, laughter echoing across polished wood. Guests toasted to Daniel's future at Harvard, their glasses clinking like church bells. I sat at the far end of the table, my fork untouched, my palms slick with sweat. I told myself, this is family. Family loves. They'll understand. When the room quieted, I opened my mouth. "Mom, Dad, But Richard's gaze cut across the table, sharp as a blade. He didn't even speak. He didn't need to. His eyes, cold and commanding, told me everything. "Don't ruin this moment. Don't ruin him." The words stuck in my throat, strangled by fear. My lips trembled shut as the conversation moved on without me, my secret buried once again. That night, as laughter carried on in the house, I sat in my room staring at the small notebook where I had written baby names across the cover. I traced each letter with my finger, fighting tears. I told myself I'd find the right time. There had to be a moment when love would matter more than reputation. Days later, I chose to believe in that moment. Over breakfast, the smell of bacon still lingering in the air, I finally spoke. "Dad, Mom, I'm pregnant." The silence was suffocating. Daniel froze with his spoon halfway to his mouth. My father's jaw tightened until the veins in his neck bulged. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, dangerous. "I'm pregnant. I'm 18, but I can do this. I'll take responsibility." My hands shook as I tried to steady my voice. The explosion came instantly. Richard slammed his fist against the table, rattling the silverware. "You've disgraced this family? Do you understand what you've done to the Matthews name?" I flinched. "Dad, please, I thought—" "You thought?" His voice rose, the mask of composure ripped away. "You thought you could parade your mistake under my roof? You've humiliated us. You've humiliated me." I turned to my mother, desperate for rescue. "Mom?" Margaret's eyes met mine, and for a fleeting second, I saw something, fear, regret, maybe recognition, but her lips remained sealed, her hands folded in her lap. She looked away as if my existence were too heavy to bear. "Say something," I begged, but she didn't, not a word. My father stood towering over me. "You will fix this. Do you hear me? You will get rid of it, or you will get out of this house and never come back." His words sliced deeper than any blade. My chest tightened, my world spun. "I won't," I whispered, tears spilling. "I won't get rid of my baby." Daniel snorted, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. You've always been pathetic, but this? You're nothing but a disgrace." The room tilted. My father's rage was unrelenting, his voice booming. "Then pack your things. You are no daughter of mine." The air felt like knives in my lungs. I stumbled upstairs, throwing clothes into a bag with trembling hands. Every sound was muffled as though I were underwater, drowning in shame and disbelief. I waited, just once, for the footsteps of my mother, for the soft knock at my door, for her whisper to fight for me. It never came. When I dragged the suitcase down the grand staircase, the chandelier above cast fractured light across my face. My father stood at the doorway, arms folded, jaw locked. Daniel smirked, satisfied. My mother lingered behind, her eyes glassy, her body motionless. The suitcase slipped from my hand, tumbling down the final steps. The sound echoed like a gavel striking judgment. I bent to lift it, my breath uneven, my vision blurred with tears. Richard opened the door. Cold rain swept in, chilling me to the bone. "Go," he said, "and don't ever come back." My feet were heavy, my body trembling, but I stepped forward into the storm. The rain plastered my hair to my cheeks as I crossed the threshold, leaving behind the house that had never been a home. Behind me, the door slammed shut, and I stood on the porch, suitcase at my feet, rain soaking me through, my hand on the small swell of my stomach. Inside me, a flicker of life kicked, and for the first time I wondered, if love was not found in blood, then where would I find it? The suitcase toppled from the porch step, thudding against the wet ground. I bent to lift it, my tears lost in the downpour, my heart split between despair and defiance. The rain hadn't stopped by morning, and neither had the whispers. By the time I found a small room to rent above a hardware store, the news had already spread across town. I felt it in the stares at the grocery store, in the sudden silence when I walked past a group of women from church. The Matthews name, once polished like a crown, now carried my shadow. Daniel made sure of it. He didn't settle for my exile. He wanted annihilation. "She's nothing but a mistake walking on two legs," he sneered one afternoon when I ran into him outside the pharmacy. His voice carried loud enough for everyone to hear. "She ruined everything. Always has." People turned, eyes narrowing, lips curling. Some whispered, some smirked. None defended me. By the end of that week, the rumor had grown claws. They said I had thrown myself at boys for attention, that I had lied about the father of my child, that I was a stain on the Matthews legacy. I tried to keep my head down, clutching my growing belly as if to shield not just the life inside me, but also the small flicker of dignity I had left. But everywhere I went, I was marked. At night, alone in the rented room, I listened to the creaks in the ceiling, the rain against the window, and the sound of my own breath trying not to break. How do you survive when your own blood paints you as the enemy? One evening, as I scrolled through my phone with trembling fingers, a message appeared from an old friend, Hannah. "There's something you need to know about your brother." My chest tightened. Hannah had always been kind, but her words felt like a warning, a thread pulled loose that could unravel everything. My hands shook as I typed back, "What do you mean?" But before she replied, my battery died. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, wondering if the rot had spread deeper than I imagined. The weeks blurred together. My father's rage replayed in my head. Daniel's sneers echoed in my ears. My mother's silence carved its hollow into my chest. And then came the night that would change everything. I returned late from a shift at the diner where I worked under the table, rain soaking through my jacket. The landlord met me at the stairwell, his eyes uncomfortable. "Your father came by," he said. "He made it clear he won't pay your rent anymore. Said if you're old enough to ruin yourself, you're old enough to fend for yourself." My throat tightened. "He's not paying my rent," I whispered. The man shrugged. "Not anymore. You've got till tomorrow." That night, I packed my suitcase again, the same one that had tumbled down the stairs of my parents' house. My hands shook as I folded clothes over the small mound of my belly. Lily kicked, reminding me I wasn't alone. But every movement was heavy, each breath thick with the knowledge that I was once again being pushed into the dark. The door slammed behind me, rain sweeping across my face as I stepped into the night. No friends waiting, no family reaching out. Just the wet pavement under my shoes and the weight of a future I hadn't chosen. Somewhere in that storm, another blow landed. A video began circulating on social media, 30 seconds long, shaky footage filmed through a window. It showed me on the night my father expelled me, but it had been cut, rearranged. The video ended with me clutching my suitcase, shouting, "I won't!" But without context, it looked as though I were screaming at my father, defiant, cruel, ungrateful. The caption read, "Matthew's daughter assaults her father before storming out. Ungrateful brat." By morning, it had thousands of views. Comments poured in. Disgusting. Spoiled brat. Her poor father. They didn't see the rain. They didn't hear his voice telling me I was no daughter of his. They didn't know the silence of my mother's lips pressed shut in fear. All they saw was what they wanted to see. I collapsed onto the mattress in my room, phone in hand, tears burning my cheeks. The world wasn't just turning against me, it was rewriting the story, casting me as the villain in a play I never auditioned for. And then, as I shoved my last belongings into the suitcase, my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. Tucked in the lining of the bag was a small envelope, edges soft from moisture. I pulled it out, heart racing. The handwriting on the front was delicate, familiar. Claire, my mother's handwriting. I tore it open, desperate, but the rain from the night I'd been thrown out had seeped into the paper. The ink bled, words blurred into one another, fragments of sentences clinging to the page. Sorry. Never wanted truth you deserve. Can't. I clutched it to my chest, shaking. My mother had tried to reach me, or had she? Why hide it instead of handing it to me herself? Why let me drown in silence only to leave behind this fragile whisper? The questions clawed at me, sharper than the rumors, louder than the jeers. Outside, the storm raged, and inside, my world split into pieces I could no longer put together. The hospital room was stark and silent, its walls painted in a shade of gray that felt more like a prison than a place of healing. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above me as I clutched the sheets, my body trembling from the labor that had just torn me apart. Hours of pain had culminated in a single cry, a cry that now echoed softly from the bassinet beside me. My daughter, Lily. Tiny fingers curled into fists, eyes squeezed shut, chest rising and falling with fragile determination. I turned my head, searching for a familiar face. No one came, no flowers, no phone calls, not a word from my family. The Matthews name loomed large in town, yet here I was, bringing life into the world utterly alone. The nurse adjusted Lily's blanket, offering me a sympathetic smile. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "Strong." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Strong. She would have to be. That night, exhaustion dragged me under, but not before my phone buzzed. A message blinked across the cracked screen. "You should have died with the baby." My blood ran cold. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Another message followed. "You're nothing, and so is she." My vision blurred with tears. Who could send something so cruel? My father? My mother? The thought that it might be Daniel clawed at my chest, though I wouldn't know the truth until years later. For now, all I felt was the crushing weight of being despised by the very people who were supposed to protect me. I turned to Lily, her tiny face soft in sleep, and whispered into the stillness, "I will never let them win." The days that followed bled together in a haze of exhaustion and fear. My body ached, my mind fractured. Nights were long, filled with Lily's cries and my own silent sobs. Bills piled up, the landlord demanded rent, and the world outside branded me a disgrace. I felt like I was walking on glass, every step cutting deeper. Weeks later, I found myself standing by the river at dusk, Lily nestled against my chest. The water glistened under the fading light, its surface deceptively calm. My arms trembled as I held her, exhaustion and despair pulling me closer to the edge. A voice inside me whispered, "It would be easier if you both slipped away. No more judgment. No more pain." I stepped closer, the cold spray of the river stinging my face. Lily stirred, letting out a soft whimper. And then, she kicked. The sudden jolt against my ribs was like lightning striking my heart. Her cry followed, sharp and desperate, a plea for life. I collapsed to my knees, clutching her to my chest. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, rocking back and forth. "I'm so sorry. I can't. I won't." The weight of the river receded, replaced by the warmth of her tiny body against mine. For the first time since the night I was cast out, a smile broke through my tears. Fragile, trembling, but real. Lily saved me when I couldn't save myself. The next morning, I sat on the thin mattress in my rented room, sunlight streaming through the cracked blinds. Lily slept beside me, her tiny fingers gripping mine even in her dreams. I watched her chest rise and fall and felt something stir inside me, a flicker of hope, stubborn and persistent. But hope was fragile, and darkness was patient. Later that day, as I scrolled through my emails on a borrowed laptop, one subject line froze me cold. "The truth about your mother." The sender was anonymous. My hands hovered over the keyboard, my heart hammering. I clicked it open. The message was brief, almost taunting. "You think you know why she stayed silent? You don't. There are things you need to uncover. Things she never told you." I stared at the screen, pulse pounding. What truth? What had Margaret hidden? Why had her eyes that night at the table glimmered with something that looked like fear? The email ended with a single line that sank into my bones. "Your survival depends on knowing what she endured." I pulled Lily closer, my chest tight. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. Years passed, and with them came the slow grind of survival. I balanced 2 jobs, waitressing by day and stocking shelves by night, while finishing my GED classes online. Lily was my anchor, the small reason I clawed forward when everything in me wanted to give up. Every time I saw her smile, I reminded myself I could not let her grow up believing she was unwanted, like I once had. When Lily turned 5, I enrolled in community college. My nights were consumed with textbooks, flashcards, and her gentle breathing beside me. The exhaustion was relentless, but so was my determination. I studied psychology not just for a degree, but for understanding why families destroy their own, why silence corrodes love, why some wounds never heal. It was during this time that I started writing. At first, they were journal entries, broken paragraphs about the night I was cast out, the bitterness in my brother's laugh, the emptiness of my mother's silence. Then, one evening, on impulse, I posted an excerpt online under an anonymous username. I expected nothing. Instead, it spread. Thousands read it, then millions. Messages poured in from strangers who whispered, "This is my story too." Women who had been disowned. Men who had been scapegoated. Children who had grown up invisible. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was resonating. My pain had found an echo. The more I wrote, the more powerful I felt. Not powerful like my father, who wielded control as a weapon, but powerful because the truth itself carried weight. I wasn't just telling my story, I was telling theirs. Then one evening, as I sifted through messages of gratitude, a new notification froze my blood. An anonymous email. "When you're ready, open your mother's letter again." I stared at the words, my heart hammering. The letter, wrinkled and water-stained, had been tucked away in a drawer for years. I had tried to decipher it countless times, but the ink had blurred too much to make sense. Was there more to it? Was there something I had missed? The past was not done with me. I pushed harder. With Lily in school, I pursued graduate studies, eventually earning my license as a therapist. My focus was trauma, particularly the kind inflicted by families who preached love while practicing cruelty. I wrote my first book under my real name, A Guide for Survivors, blending research with my own veiled experiences. It soared to the bestseller list. My face appeared on talk shows. My voice carried weight. Yet even as I stood on stages, there was a part of me that remained unfinished. The Matthews name still sat in the background of my mind, poisoning memories I hadn't yet reclaimed. It was during a speaking tour that I stumbled on the next piece of evidence. A woman in her 60s approached me after a lecture, her eyes glistening. "I knew your mother," she said quietly. Back when she was still Margaret Turner, before she married Richard. My breath caught. "What do you mean?" The woman hesitated, then pressed a folded note into my hand. "Ask her about 1981. She'll never tell you, but you deserve to know." I returned home, shaken, the words repeating in my mind like a drumbeat. 1981. That was years before I was born. I dug into public records, searching, piecing together fragments. What I discovered left me reeling. Margaret had been pregnant before her marriage to Richard. That child never came to be. The truth crystallized as I pored over medical records and testimony from an old doctor. Richard had forced her to terminate the pregnancy. The same Richard who had thrown me out for refusing to do the same. It wasn't hypocrisy. It was control. It always had been. Armed with this knowledge, I revisited the envelope she had slipped into my suitcase all those years ago. The smudged words now held a different weight. Never wanted, truth you deserve, can't. She hadn't been apologizing for my pregnancy. She had been confessing her own chains. The fury that rose in me was unlike anything I had ever felt. For years, I had carried the shame of being unwanted. Now I understood. I had never been unwanted. I had been inconvenient to his image. Just like my mother before me. I began to prepare, quietly, carefully. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. The original, uncut version of the video from that night, saved by a neighbor who had always doubted the town's version. Financial documents buried in legal filings that showed Richard funneling money through shadow accounts. Margaret's medical history. Every stone I turned revealed more rot. Each night, I stared at myself in the mirror, the reflection no longer of the trembling girl who had once begged for her father's approval, but of a woman who had survived hell and clawed her way back. One evening, after stacking a pile of evidence on my desk, I leaned closer to my reflection, my voice steady, my heart resolute. It's time. The Matthews estate looked exactly as I remembered. Tall, proud, a monument to appearances. White shutters gleamed, the hedges were cut sharp as blades, the driveway spotless. Yet as I stood at the gates with Lily at my side, the place seemed smaller, hollow, like a mask stripped of its power. Lily's hand slipped into mine. She was 18 now, strong, her eyes alight with the determination I once lacked. "Ready?" she whispered. I nodded. More than ever. We walked up the drive together. Richard opened the door, his frame still imposing, though age had hunched his shoulders and dulled his eyes. His mouth twisted at the sight of me. "You dare come back here?" Before I could answer, Lily raised her phone, camera light blinking red. "We're live," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the marble foyer. Within minutes, thousands had tuned in, then tens of thousands. The chat scrolled so fast it blurred. The Matthews family's perfect facade was about to crack before an audience that would not look away. Richard lunged toward Lily. "Turn that off." "No," I said. My voice was steady, calm, cutting through the chaos like glass. "The truth deserves to be seen." I reached into my bag and placed the wrinkled envelope on the table. "This is the letter Mom left me the night you threw me out." Gasps echoed across the live stream chat as I held it up, the ink-stained words visible beneath the light. "She wrote of a truth she couldn't speak because she was too afraid of you." Margaret's face blanched. Her hands trembled in her lap. I continued, pulling up the original video file. "And here's what really happened that night, not the doctored clip Daniel circulated." I pressed play, the shaky footage filling Lily's screen. The crowd online watched as Richard's voice thundered, calling me a disgrace, throwing me out, while I stood shaking in the rain. No screams from me, no defiance. Just his cruelty, unedited. Daniel sprang forward. That's a lie. That's fake. But his panic betrayed him. I met his gaze, my voice steady. And here's proof of your financial fraud. I laid down documents I had pulled from public filings, showing money siphoned into offshore accounts, all while pretending to be the family's golden boy. The chat exploded. He's finished. Exposed. Justice. Richard's fists clenched, his face red with rage. You think you can destroy us with lies? I don't need lies, I replied. The truth is enough. For a moment, silence fell, and then Margaret stood. Her voice cracked as she said, Claire, there's something you don't know. The room froze. What do you mean? I asked, my chest tightening. Margaret's tears spilled freely as she turned toward me. You're not Richard's daughter. He knew it from the beginning. He agreed to raise you only to protect his reputation, to keep people from asking questions. You were never his blood. The words cut deeper than any wound I had carried, my vision blurred, my knees weak. What? Richard sneered, his voice dripping venom. I took you in. I gave you my name. You should have been grateful. The live stream exploded again, messages flying. Monster! Not a father. Disgusting. Daniel stumbled backward, papers sliding from the table. The weight of his own exposure pressed down on him. She's lying, he stammered, but no one believed him anymore. His empire of deceit crumbled in real time, before thousands of witnesses. The Matthews family, once untouchable, now stood stripped bare. Richard, the tyrant. Daniel, the fraud. Margaret, the broken accomplice. The mask had shattered, and the crowd was watching every jagged piece fall. I turned to Lily. Her grip on my hand was firm, grounding me. We had done what I once thought impossible. I faced them one last time. You took everything from me, my home, my name, my worth. But you didn't take my voice. And now, everyone sees who you really are. With that, I walked toward the door. My footsteps echoed against the marble, each one louder than the last. The chat continued to erupt as Lily angled the camera one final time, capturing the estate's grandeur crumbling under the weight of truth. Margaret's sobs filled the silence, Richard's rage seethed, and Daniel's face sagged with defeat. Outside, the air was cool, the sky vast. I drew in a long breath. For the first time, it felt like freedom. As the gates closed behind me, the live stream ended. I glanced at Lily, then back at the house that had once defined me. My heart was steady, but my mind whispered a question I couldn't silence. Was justice enough to heal the wounds they left behind? The fallout was swift. Within weeks, headlines carried Richard Matthews' name not as a symbol of justice, but of disgrace. Investigations revealed a labyrinth of unethical dealings, cases manipulated, clients exploited. His license was suspended, his career dismantled. The man who once held the town in a chokehold of fear was now a pariah. Daniel's collapse came even faster. Banks foreclosed on his properties, lawsuits piled up, and the whispers of fraud became public record. The same neighbors who once praised him for his brilliance now shook their heads, muttering, "He was always too slick." Overnight, his empire dissolved, leaving him scrambling in the wreckage of his own lies. Margaret, fragile and trembling, could not withstand the storm. The weight of decades of silence, of secrets swallowed whole, broke her. She was admitted to a psychiatric ward after a breakdown, her once perfect poise unraveling into fragments of confession and regret. The Matthews name, once gilded, now echoed with shame. The town that once admired them now turned its whispers sharp and cruel. So much for the perfect family, they said. It was all a lie. For the first time, I did not shrink beneath their judgment. Their scorn was not mine to carry. Lily and I walked the shoreline one evening, waves curling at our feet, salt clinging to the air. The sea stretched endless before us, wide and unbroken, a freedom I hadn't felt in 18 years. Lily slipped her arm through mine. "We're really free now, aren't we?" she asked softly. I nodded, my chest tightening with something that felt like peace. Yes, for the first time. We walked in silence, letting the rhythm of the ocean soothe the echoes of the past. For years, every step I had taken had been weighted with survival, with defiance, with fear. Now, with the water rushing at our ankles and the horizon vast, it felt like the first breath of a life that was truly ours. The healing didn't come all at once. It came in small moments. Lily's laughter on the beach, mornings filled with sunlight rather than dread, the realization that my worth was not tied to a family's approval. Each moment stitched me back together, not into who I had been, but into who I was becoming. In time, I wrote my story, not as anonymous posts or whispered fragments, but as a full memoir. I poured every fracture, every wound, every step of survival onto the page. It was not just about betrayal or cruelty. It was about endurance, about rising again and again, even when no one believed you could. The book was released to a world hungry for truth. Letters poured in from survivors across continents, men and women who had lived my pain in their own homes. My words gave them language for wounds they had never spoken. Invitations followed, conferences, universities, global platforms. I became not just Claire, the girl discarded, but Claire, the voice for those still trapped in silence. Standing on stages across the world, I looked into the eyes of strangers who were no longer strangers. They were me, and I was them. We carried one another's stories like lifelines. I spoke not of revenge, but of transformation, how the deepest scars can become maps toward freedom. One evening, as the cameras clicked and the lights burned bright, I paused. My prepared speech fell away. Instead, I looked directly into the lens before me, knowing thousands, perhaps millions, were watching. If you have ever been abandoned, I said, my voice steady, if your own family made you feel like you didn't belong, ask yourself this: do you have the courage to write your own story again? Not the story they forced on you, but the one you deserve? The auditorium was silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. On the live stream, comments flooded in. Tears, confessions, declarations of strength. I stepped back from the podium, my heart unburdened. I was no longer bound by the Matthews legacy. I was free, not because they had fallen, but because I had chosen to rise. At home, Lily greeted me with open arms. She was my proof, my living testament that love chosen is stronger than love demanded. Together, we built a life not of masks, but of truth. And in the quiet of my room, I often returned to the mirror. The woman staring back at me was not the trembling girl who had begged her father for mercy. She was someone reborn, forged in fire, carrying wisdom in her scars. The story was no longer theirs to tell. It was mine.